Welcome everyone to our fourth session, I believe, of the patient summary conformance. Um, it's a dreary day here in Adelaide, so hopefully we'll get some rain for, I guess you guys up in the north are probably sick of rain, but we can't wait. So, um, yep, moving on. Initially, we'll acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land of which we all gather today. We pay our respects to elders past, present, emerging, and extend our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the first peoples as the first scientists, educators, and healers. And I'm coming from Kaurna land here in Adelaide. So very quickly, rebrief on our goals. We started out these sessions looking at doing some information sessions about what is conformance through to how patient summary and how it relates to AU core and international patient summary. But the primary purpose of these sessions is to come out at the end of the June or near to it with a proposal of the conformance requirements for AU patient summary implementation guide for draft. And also, as a byproduct of that, we're expecting to have some changes to propose for either AU core and IPS. And that's certainly been the case thus far. Certainly with the IPS, I've been feeding quite a considerable amount of feedback to that group. If you're not aware that I do attend a meeting on a weekly basis with the chaps in, well, around the world really, but mainly in America, which is talking about the rework on the IPS 2.0 ballot reconciliation and the like, and in particular, the implementation of obligations to their must support requirements in this new release. So it's very much related to what we're doing here. So we've had the three sessions so far. This is our fourth one. And today we're going to move into, I guess, in general, the topic of what are the system behavior requirements for AU patient summary. But really what we've started to do here is a slight change in the way that we've been doing is actually coming up with some suggestions, and we are looking for you to review those. So that is the primary agenda for today, is to start moving through a proposal of what the conformance might look like for patient summary and get your feedback on that. Last session, just a quick recap. We were talking about data conformance requirements, and we considered the need for a document only or a profile only conformance specification in a similar way that AU Core has a profile only conformance requirement. But after a long conversation around this, we came to a conclusion that there is no requirement for an AU patient summary data only conformance specification. So I want to pause a little bit just to make sure that I haven't misunderstood the outcome of last meeting, but that is certainly how I have interpreted the outcome of the last session. So there will not be a document only or profile only conformance requirement. If there's no commentary on that, I will move forward and assume that that was a reasonable assumption or outcome from last meeting. So today, as I said, we'll start looking at what are the conformance requirements are for systems producing and consuming an AU patient summary. So as part of that, to try and escalate the process, I've got a proposal for you to review. Starters looking at actors, and we'll see how far we get into it. Certainly based on last session, I got through about 2 slides of about 25. So I'm not holding my breath, but let's see how we go this today. But Not to say it wasn't a great outcome, because I think it was. It certainly saved me a lot of heartache. So just to revisit some design principles that we agreed to back in Melbourne in December 2024 at our first face-to-face meeting on patient summary. We talked about three principles. One, which was that we will, AU patient summary profiles will validate against both an IPS and AU core profiles, where both are available, and that includes things like cardinality, must support, fixed values, data type elements. And the other two is around reference elements. So we're going to reference AU patient summary, patient. It's actually a UPS patient, where it's defined. Otherwise, we will choose an appropriate AU core versus or IPS profile if they exist. And we also will take a preference over the value sets specified in AU core over any value sets from IPS where it's possible. The key one is number one that we're talking about here today. So coming back to basically that main premise that what we're trying to achieve with AUPS is conformance with both core and IPS. And in particular, the must support components of that. So working through this, I felt that we needed some principles around what AUPS must support and obligation means. So this is where I'd like to start today. This is not necessarily something that we will put in the implementation guide. It's more about for us as a TDG to um, provide guidance on how we assign must support and obligations. We've got some guidance already on around like scope of things and whether something should be must support, but then it's the additional obligations and expectations of our systems on how what the conformance requirements are. So first principle that I would like to propose is that all must support elements in a UPS profile shall, where applicable, have conformance obligations that satisfy the IPS profile expectations for the corresponding producer and consumer actors. Is that mainly for the first stop point, Danielle? Did you want, is that in the wiki page? I couldn't see your message specifically.
No, I was messaging you about something that we can display if we want to in this session.
Okay.
So I didn't have a particular comment on point one, though I guess I can say, uh, I mean, yes, okay, so to comply with IPS, and IPS sets rules around when you produce a patient summary and when you consume a patient summary, which were our high priority things in when we did the scoping in Australia. That means there are some requirements that we need to meet if we're going to actually be compliant to IPS and compliant to AU core. So I think, yes, that number one is, yeah. I think that that is absolutely correct, that we are required to do that. And I expect a formal policy coming from HL7 International at some point around this kind of thing.
In fact, I think there is some statements in the implementation guide that is saying that if we deviate from this, that we need to state the fact. So in the must support and obligations page, there's this dedicated one now in the draft where they are talking about it, that basically downstream IGs shall do this. And if we deviate, that we have to say why. AUPS profile may strengthen the IPS profile obligations using a specialization of the defined obligation is my qualification on that, or add an additional obligation as necessary in the Australian context. And the obvious counter to that statement is that a weaker obligation shall not be specified on that one. And I could just put the third one up as well, and then we can discuss all three. An implementation guide that derives from AUPS profile may strengthen the AUPS profile obligations, or an additional obligation as necessary in the implementation context. Again, a weaker obligation shall not be specified. So I don't think that we're looking for an agreement on these principles. Like, it's more about these principles perhaps being presented to the TDG for ratification. But I would like to certainly discuss and ensure that these principles seem reasonable to this group of people that are interested in conformance.
Yeah, Heath, I think they're totally reasonable. I mean, they're aligned with the sort of profiling that happens in both IAG and HL7B2, where localization is based on obligations being stronger, not weaker than the base profile or standard. Um, so yeah, I think that's aligned with the usual approach to doing this.
Thank you. Okay. If there's no other comments on that, I'll move forward. So,
Heath, sorry, I
yes,
was trying to find the unmute button.
I was
The
expecting you to have something to say, Stephen.
At the
I
work group
almost called you
meet
out.
at the work group meeting, Grant Grief sort of make a comment that we probably need to consider a bit more carefully when we tighten up the constraints or the obligations on the international profiles, given that there might be vendors or uh, clinical systems out there that might not be able to conform to a tighter obligation. And so therefore, basically, if we tighten it up too much, it might force people either to send in non-conformant AU summary or not using the AU summary IG at all. So we sort of have we considered those kind of implications that Graham raised, and sort of and still decided that we want to go to a tighter constraint rather than sort of align with the international based constraints.
Okay, so two comments on that. One is that I guess we are trying to, well, as IPS, it's still work in progress. So what are the exact obligations is still being reviewed, and there was some discussions literally this week where we removed a whole heap of stuff. But in the context of what I think you're talking about with Graham, the committee call 2 weeks ago basically agreed that we would not weaken it so far as not being compatible with the expectations of the ISO standard. So using Hajj as an example, where it is currently only being used for immunizations, although there is some intention to be more than that in due course, that effectively, if they are not satisfying those obligations, they are not conformant to the IPS IG. Doesn't mean that you can't implement it, it's just that you're not conformant to it or declare conformance to it. Danielle?
I think I probably also wanted to point out is we're not This isn't actually proposing we go stronger. It's clarifying that to be compliant, we have to be at least as strong as IPS.
Mm.
We could add an extra like a warning or a this should be considered carefully when strengthening to that third principle to kind of just draw attention that we do need to really consider if we are choosing to strengthen something.
And I'm okay with that. In that case, then I'm more concerned about either we are forcing people to put in data absence reasons for which will involve additional efforts and in order to be conformant. I'm okay with what Daniel has just said.
And I think, again, it's just the due process, right? If we feel that something's too strong, we take it back to IPS, they'll consider it, and they will. If we still feel that we want to deviate from that, then we have to document that. So I think all of the processes are in place, and other than the literal implementation of that. Vince, you came off.
Yeah, and the HUD is an interesting use case. I mean, it's been set up as a separate IAG profile for exactly that reason. It actually doesn't meet the conformance requirements for IPS. So it's been done as a separate profile, obviously, derived from IPS, but because the obligations are not being met in that, it's being treated as a separate conformance process.
And I mean, the other problem is not problem, but the implication of that so far is that Canada has also done the same. So they're not actually inheriting. What we've decided as a TDG is that we would like to, and hence, based on that decision, these are the principles on how we would implement that.
Do you know why they've made that decision?
Canada?
Hmm.
No. Other than, actually, they're pretty good in their documentation
Yes.
to actually say on an element by element level why.
Mhm.
Daniel.
Well, I was going to say they have allowed for similar use cases like the Harge, where they've said you can use this like IG if you are like just an immunization register or just an allergy kind of register, send those rather than being a full view of a patient summary. And I think that's something that that got discussed during the IPS project meeting, and they're quite comfortable saying, look, you can, or at least that was the conversation. I don't know if it's flowed back yet on saying, look, you can use these profiles and send a subset, but then we recognize that means you aren't considered a full patient summary and conformant to those rules.
Mhm.
And again, they're quite clear in what their scope is in IPS, that it is for cross-boundary emergency urgent care, not
Mhm.
for continuity of care, if you like,
Mhm.
which is probably where,
Well,
I mean, Hajj, as you say, is a special case, but I suspect that Canada is more in that continuity of care space, more
I
so
thought there'd
than
be,
cross-boundary emergency care.
I thought there'd be two that actually extended that scope from emergency to chronic care.
Not based on what I was seeing in the homepage more recently. And again,
Okay.
that obviously is still referring to the ISO standard, which is even stricter again, basically
Mm.
saying it
Mm.
is literally for international.
Yeah, but that was certainly the original intention.
Yeah.
Uh, Canada does have the use case of cross border in the sense of cross jurisdictional border care, so which is not exactly that they are not needed to support that kind of requirement. So it's both, from my understanding, supporting both continuity of care and also transition of care.
Yeah, I mean, even Washington State, I think, is initially at least were focused on immunizations only as well. So
But I mean, even if you don't populate all the sections in an IPS, but you provide, you know, a code that's says there's missing data, you can still conform to the
Well,
basic.
actually, you can conform on the wire, but your system may not be a conformant implementation because part of the obligations require demonstrating capability for the mandatory sections, so allergies. So you need to demonstrate the capability that under the correct circumstances, like you have allergy information, you can populate that.
even more specifically, that you can provide an IPS allergy intolerance.
Mm.
So
Sure,
they're
sure.
actually now with obligations, they're going down that far and saying you shall be capable of providing an IPS allergy intolerance profile, not just a document reference. If you are only capable of providing a document reference, you're not IPS compliant. Whereas
And
previously,
therefore,
before obligations, that wasn't necessarily the case.
And so I think part of that is why we're going to put forward or have in AU patient summary I think we need to provide clarity on what are required by producers and consumers of Australian patient summary documents, even if we're exactly the same, basically, as IPS, on what those requirements are so that systems can happily implement AU patient summary. And they are indeed meeting the obligations of IPS.
I think we will need to review this with particular major use cases in mind. I mean, ADHA is planning to use IPS as the exchange mechanism between aged care and primary care. Aged care systems may not have the richness of data that populating or an IPS would need, whether the aged care systems are going to support that, even though the data isn't generally available at aged care, is going to be an interesting discussion.
So think about that as we move through these, Vince, because I think we'll probably touch on those as we go through these this proposal. Okay, so moving on to actors. So generally, I talked about the concept of a producer and a consumer in those principles. So as part of applying obligations in IPS, they have also created actors, and they literally are a consumer and a producer. So we're looking to adopt that same pattern by having a UPS producer actor. Where it's defined something like this: a system which creates or assembles an AUPS bundle through automated generation or human curation of the patient summary content. And an AUPS consumer will be defined, or proposed to be defined, a system which receives an AUPS bundle and uses it to display or process patient summary content. So, any comments on those definitions? So we will create an actor definition, a fire actor definition for these two actors with this definition.
They're a bit asymmetrical, and the producer doesn't send what the consumer receives.
Yes, absolutely.
I would have thought it would be better for the consumer to be defined as just processing an AUPS bundle.
The producer?
The consumer.
Maybe we make it a tautology. So instead of receive, we find a word that is more associated with consume, and maybe we keep it at consume. Because I agree, receive implies an exchange process.
Yeah,
exactly.
I've used receive because that's the word that's used in IPS, but more than
Oh.
happy to take that.
I
Could
mean,
could you
unless
raise
you,
that? Sorry, Stephen.
sorry,
I think if we
unless we consider consumer doesn't have a role of receiving it, then I'm fine with us removing the word receive. But I think that the consumer role has a part of that activity is receiving it, unless you are talking about the consumer also produces or generates the patient summary for its own use. In that case, then you are actually kind of confusing the two roles. So I think that it is fine to sort of retain the word receives and use in the consumer roles.
But if you've got a system that is, creating an IP and displaying it to the user, then that's the same system doing production and consuming, and it's not doing a receive in any shape or form.
All right, so we take that as an action maybe to try and find a better word, but just very quickly, I'm showing you the IPS definitions for these consumers, and they are literally using those words. I have changed, I've taken out a whole heap of stuff in the middle of there. So the concept of automated processes and human curation has come from there. Display and process has come from there. So I've just tried to simplify it in these definitions. Sorry.
I think from
Also,
the sorry, Danielle, I think from the FHIR perspective, because it is an exchange standard, and so therefore it's predicated on the premise that there will be a request for the information, and the responder to the request will produce the package of data to be received by the requester. So I think we shouldn't be so consumed by the fact that an actor will both act as a producer and a consumer. In that sense, the definition should be taken in the context of the file exchange processes rather than out of that context. And I'm okay with the wording as they are.
Yeah, I must say also alignment with the HL7 standard is also important. So maybe it's not worth pursuing.
I'm thinking that receive and display or process sounds like consume.
And I agree.
And so to that extent, the description of receive and display or process winds up being, in a sense, describing the intent of consume. We don't actually need it to repeat the word.
We could list them as examples, because I think it's not just because I think the part of what I like around IPS's use is there is an intention behind what someone is doing here. Like they're doing something with it. I'm also quite happy to either to have consume. I like having examples like display, don't know about process, for example instances of what that might be.
We do need to define the concept of consume, though, otherwise it becomes kind of recursive.
No, we've got the meaning of, or at least the minimum requirements on consumption get defined by the obligations, which have like display, print, store, etc. Or actually, I think it's called persist. So the parent obligation is these are all kinds of consuming things you can do. And I think then what we're saying is this is a category, and then more the specific requirements where they exist are then on each of the element definitions defined in the profiles. But we Have to
So,
phrase it in a more business friendly way than that.
so the definition of consumer from the obligations code system, an application that consumes resources. So it's, as you said, it's a little bit recursive.
Probably what RPS has use.
Yeah. And the other aspect is that this is not necessarily assuming any sort of exchange mechanism either. So it could be kind of an IHE media approach to this as well. So yeah, anyway,
Yeah, look,
perhaps rather than
well,
getting hung up on this one slide or this one word, we move on, and we just take it as, we'll take suggestions. So if you want to think about it, that and come back maybe on Zulip, we can open up a Zulip channel.
okay, I just want to say one more thing. If we use recursive words to create definitions, in the past we always get dinged by vocabulary group. So just sort of like something to think about.
Yeah. I mean, I just tried looking up synonyms and nothing really stood out, but. Okay, so moving on, based on those two concepts of producer and consumer, I will then break down into conformance for a producer. So a system declaring conformance to AU patient summary as an AU patient summary shall implement AUPS bundle, AUPS composition, and AUPS patient profiles. These are the mandatory profiles that you shall implement to be conformant as a producer. And then for each additional resource type implemented by the producer, shall implement an appropriate profile defined in AUPS bundle. So we're talking about now any other resource type that you implement, you shall use the AUPS or the profile that is referenced from the AUPS bundle.
We need a where exists.
Mm-hmm.
Or something like that. Because it's open slicing, and I don't imagine the people here are proposing that we don't continue to allow the openness of bundle, and only some of those are profiled. Like people can add in extra sections with extra resources. So we just need to have a caveat in that statement.
So Danielle, you're suggesting for the caveat there that would cover off, for example, like an allergen tolerance profile exists for Australian patient summary. So if you want to be conformant, you need to use that profile. But for other sections, we retain the openness, just to clarify.
So yes. So only the bundles and this, I guess the sections defined so far by patient summary, and they keep growing, which is fantastic, only cover, certain resource types. Some are just profiled as just fire, so like clinical impression, but it doesn't cover all of them, which might end up being relevant for patient summaries. So in that circumstance, where there is a section someone is adding to the composition that whose purpose and use requires inclusion of a resource type that isn't yet in the scope of patient summary, then there is no appropriate profile defined. But I don't think we should be limiting that allowance. We should allow people to have in these extra sections with resources that aren't yet profiled.
Absolutely. I'm wondering if we need an additional point around should. So where no appropriate profile exists, producers should populate with AU core conformant or AU base conformant profiles preferentially.
I like that. There's a whole bunch of stuff in AU base that isn't profiled by core or IPS, and I think that's a really good idea to call that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's implied for a lot of the community, but I think having the explicit guidance will help drag people in the right direction.
Was it only AU core you were suggesting?
No, I was suggesting AU core and then AU base, like in that order, which is our order of
And what about
inheritance.
IPS?
No, because it'll be called out. Sorry, I'm just going to say we don't have to do that because that will be referenced in the AUPS bundle. There is no IPS profile that is identified that, okay, how do I want to say it? I want to say that point 2 covers that issue.
That's the appropriate profile. Is that what you're saying, Danielle?
Yes. So I'm saying that we have, so where there's both the IPS, okay, I'll just let's be fully comprehensive.
So you're not referring to what Marika said originally. You're referring to what I said.
Yes, that's
Okay.
right. I'm referring
Yep.
to what you said about we don't need to mention IPS in this order of inheritance because if
Yep.
we've deemed the only thing available is an IPS profile and not an AU patient summary profile, that'll already be referenced in the bundle. So we don't need to do it, doesn't fall into the in other circumstances bucket.
Okay. So have I recorded that as a note appropriately?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So the fourth dot point. Sorry, I'm on another screen. Go to the next one. Okay, shall conform to the AUPS producer obligations defined on the profile referenced in the AUPS bundle. So again, where we will normally have an AUPS profile, if there is an IPS and an AU core profile, we will provide an AUPS version of that profile, and that will be referenced from the AUPS bundle. If there is no IPS, but there is an AU core one that we reference from AUPS, then we need to abide by those obligations. And if there's only an IPS profile and no AU core profile, then I think that's the next dot point. Where an IPS profile referenced in the AUPS, the obligations of the producer IPS actor shall apply. So if we're referencing from the AUPS and IPS profile, we will inherit the obligations from the IPS producer. And unfortunately, this is their naming scheme in brackets, IPS. So I'm just going to shorten it to, well, I won't shorten it. I'm going to turn that around, IPS producer, just to qualify it. Any comments on that? Is it clear as mud?
I agree with the sentiment. I'd like us to say less words. We talk about our UPS bundle a lot, and I wonder if these are cascading, and we've already said this for point 2 and 3.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we don't need the on the profile referenced in the ... and we can just say on the implemented profile, because we've talked about the implementation requirements in the one above it.
Okay, so that might be a good segue then to introduce you to
Sanjeev's got his hand up too.
a conformance page that I'll provide, and maybe Danielle, you can provide in the commentary.
Yep.
So there is a proposal page here which is basically a consolidation of all of these slides. So we've got the design principles above, a few strikeouts here, just some because it's work in progress, but these rules are specified here. So more than happy to take your comments on how to improve these on this page, please. Senji.
Maybe I'm confused. Just a question, Anit. It's on your previous slide, and especially point 2. So just to clarify, to confirm to AUPS, at a minimum, we need to confirm with IPS, and also all individual resources that are part of the composition, we need to conform to them as well, be it AU core, AU base. Is that what I'm hearing here?
So
suppose a composition contains medications, requests, allergy, immunization, and related person. That's what we had agreed, right? So we don't need. Do we need to wait for AU compliance before we conformance before we conform it with AUPS?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I think it's if you're saying you implement the AU patient summary requirements, then we're saying that when you're meeting the obligations for a producer around, in this circumstance, producer or consumer around an AU, around a related person resource, or around a medication request resource, if you're including them.
So if I'm understanding your question as well, you're asking, do you need to, if you're implementing IPS?
AUPS, sorry, IPS. So if I'm implementing AUPS, I need to work on AU core first.
Well, effectively, you need to do both, yes. Right.
Yeah.
So if you've implemented IPS, you're not AUPS compliant because you're potentially not AU core compliant.
Yeah.
I'll also point out here that part of this conversation is assuming that we don't determine appropriate rules in Australia for Australian use cases. Like, I don't imagine it's going to be this flat generic thing where we never, as a group, describe any particular requirements for a patient summary context. I think that's coming. And that's why we have these AU patient summary profiles, so we could be clear around what your requirements are in the patient summary context. And why we're bringing them all in and discussing what we think that all is and having an agreement in Australia on how we do it for this circumstance.
Yeah. And the previous TDG calls have been going through each of the profiles and basically pointing out where the intersection between IPS and AU core are different, and hence you need to pay your attention to be able to satisfy that principle of being conformant to both.
And that's a point. As a vendor, I'm just looking at the effort needed to be AUPS conformant. What kind of AU core conformance we need?
Well, you need to be AU core conformant.
Yeah.
So you need to abide by those obligations in the context of AUPS consumer or producer, not in the context of requester and responder.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do need to understand the distinction here that the two actors we're defining in AUPS doesn't correlate directly to the AU core actors. In fact,
oh yeah, 100%.
You may actually need to be both in either direction. In other words, as a responder, you may need to be a consumer as well as a producer. And similarly, as a requester, you may be a consumer and a producer.
I mean, if we look at something
but we're
like
not going there yet.
Okay, I'll stop. But yeah, I mean, if we look at actors and IHE, there's things around generation, but then there's also things that actually different actors that send things and receive things and that kind of thing. And so there's producing a patient summary doesn't require, so this requires the profile only conformance, I guess I'll say, from AU Core. It doesn't require a profile plus interaction. So you don't have to meet the obligations of any of the AU Core actors to satisfy patient summary.
Yeah. And when we're talking about the intersection between them, the variance between them, it's very small. We're probably in each profile talking maybe 1 or 2 elements. Okay. Last up point, hopefully non-controversial, shall implement the requirements on missing data and suppressed data for an AUPS producer. Now I said non-controversial, but I actually got my own controversy, and that is, what about empty sections? And I'm going to leave that as an open question at the moment, unless someone wants to comment on that.
Is the current guidance around empty sections a should?
To be
No,
in IPS,
no.
you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's put that on hold because I'll come back to it later. But basically, I'm putting this on the agenda. So
Sounds good.
the idea of what we had in AE Core talked about missing data and suppressed data. And because IPS now has introduced the concept of empty reason as part of empty sections, we now need to actually go further than just talking about missing data and suppressed data. It is slightly different, in my opinion, but we'll come to that probably next week.
So if this final bullet point applies to IPS sections that are mandatory as well?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
But that's why I've raised the issue around empty sections. So we need to, there is some choice in IPS on how to deal with that. And we need to consider what we want for in Australia.
Do we need a principle that states exactly how empty sections are dealt with? I mean, there will almost always be empty sections for many implementations. So some explicit guidance as to how they should be handled, I think, would be useful.
Well, is there simply including the concept of empty sections in this last principle rather than having yet another principle?
Possibly, if the way you deal with them is the same.
It's not.
No, exactly.
But it's conceptually, it's the principle, right? So all we're saying here is that you shall implement the requirements on missing data and suppressed data.
Yeah, okay.
So but if we then had additional requirements around empty sections, then we in principle can include empty sections into this principle to say that you shall implement the requirements on empty sections, missing data and suppressed data.
Yeah, no, that sounds fair.
Okay. Does everyone agree with that addition to this principle?
So is does the empty sections mean that we would just in the composition put that there are no entries? Is that all that it would ultimately come down to?
There is an empty
We have to
reason.
meet IPS's requirements. And so while we haven't talked about those, there is a baseline set of what you have to do with empty sections that we have to include, which, yeah, is using, so there's even at the profile level, there's an invariant that says you need to have either entry or empty reason in your section. So we have to do that for at least the mandatory stuff.
Yeah, I was just kind of, move away from the theoretical to the practical. And from my memory, when I was looking at this before, it was you would have, in the composition, you'd have the different sections, but you just have that there's no data in that section. So therefore, you don't have to include any of the resources further down.
Yeah, but you're talking on the wire again, and what Danielle's talking about is to satisfy the invariant that's defined in the profile, but then there is this choice of how to actually satisfy that. You can actually provide what we currently do in AU Core, a allergy intolerance as a an assertion as a clinical statement that there are no known allergies, right? That's one option. But their new recommendation, as of 2.0 balloted last year, is their preferred approach is to actually use empty reason flag instead of the explicit one. So, that's the requirement I'm talking about, is what is our requirement in Australia, because they've given us the option, they've given us a recommendation. They haven't discounted the fact that we use an explicit clinical statement, but we probably need to talk about, are we just going to go with the same openness and leave it up to the implementer, or do we want to constrain that further or make an alternate recommendation?
Okay, cool. Thanks.
And we will come to that next week. Okay, so consumer on the flip side, I think we might seem like it's parallel, but it's not. So system declaring conformist AU patient summary as an AUPS consumer shall implement AUPS bundle, PS composition, and AUPS profiles. But for each mandatory section shall implement the AUPS profile referenced by this section entry, i.e. AUPS, allergy intolerance condition, medication statement, and medication request.
Sorry, can you say, oh, no, I agree. It's an and, not an or for consumers. Yeah.
All right, so we're now saying, because you're consuming this, you shall implement these profiles. You have no choice because you don't know what you're going to get. Sanjeet?
I'm assuming in this case, it won't just be profile conformance, it'll be interactions as well.
No, we're not talking about interactions here, Sanjeet. Not
No.
yet have we talked about interactions.
No,
So,
for consumer.
so you've received, right? Going back, received, however you've received it, don't know how you received it. You've just got it and you're trying to display it. You shall display it.
Yeah.
Those four.
On display only. Okay.
Well, if that's what you're doing, right? If you're processing it, whatever processing means, or maybe you're a clinical decision support, you shall process that. You might process it by ignoring it, but that's a conscious decision to ignore it.
So it may involve interactions.
We're not defining that yet.
That's not part of the conformance proposal. There's no proposal for specific interactions around read or search or any of that kind of stuff.
So however you receive it, whether you're receiving it by doing a dollar summary, whether you're receiving it by a piece of USB key, when you start processing it or trying to display it or trying to store it, whatever you're doing as part of processing it, you shall implement these profiles. So that in summary, the producer has the choice other than the first three. But
got a question
the
here.
consumer does not.
The IE, that suggests that the following list is a complete list of everything.
Yep, 100%. That is the complete list.
Okay.
The mandatory sections.
Okay. So why have you, well, just another one. Why has it been divided that way into two lines? Something or other,
It's just
comma,
rendering.
something or other, comma, and then, okay.
My slides rendering, sorry, Richard.
Fine, good.
I needed room.
No. That's fine. Okay, good. Thank
In
you.
sentence form, it would be one line.
No. My big question was the IE suggested this is an exhaustive list. If it's an exhaustive list, I'm happy. Thank you.
Yeah. So we got the three sections, right? Medications, problems, and allergies. Under medications, and probably why I've split it at that level, is you've got a choice between medication request and medication statement as a producer, but as a consumer, you do not. You shall implement both. So for the next dot point are the recommended sections. Should implement the profiles referenced by the section entry. And now we've got a set of examples, not exhaustive. We've got immunization there as a UPS, but we've got an IPS radiology observation result. So because it should, don't need to, but you should. And now we're up the tree to IPS for observation results radiology, device use statement IPS, and we've got our AUPS procedure. Danielle.
I'm looking at IPS composition again, and while I know it's changing, I think bullet point 3. Oh, no, I'll take it back. I'll think about it a bit more. I was a bit iffy on bullet point 3 and whether or not that was something that we could do and meet IPS's obligations, but I'm thinking, okay, let me go away and I'll put comments on the Confluence page if I think that's not quite right.
Anyone else got any comments or concerns?
I don't know. It's really, hi Heath. I don't know if comment or concern, but it's good. It's just getting my head around what's going on here, I guess. Because when we're using this patient summary message or exchange of data, and I look at that mandatory section, so odds are I'm sending you this patient summary, and don't forget this guy is allergic to this. They've got this condition. This is what they're currently taking. And by the way, can I get another bit of this stuff? This pretty standard set of data that you would probably be doing anyway. And that's why they're saying it's mandatory. And so if they had no allergies or intolerance, what you would need to do is what we were saying. Is that an empty section you were talking about before to say, oh yeah, no, sorry, he's got no allergies. Is that the context of that last one?
Of the last one or the should one? The
The,
second one.
no, the first, just the idea what the
I
empty.
think David is going to your bullet point 4, which is in at profile level, but it's about the actual obligations within these profiles and what a consumer has to do.
Right.
Which, if there's an obligation on section.empty reason, then then there's a rule, and there is. For some of them, I think. Oh, actually, I don't know, Heath. Is it across all of the empty reason, or is it only on the mandatory sections? But either way, that's kind of
It's
set.
only on the mandatory sections.
Yeah.
Because they're mandatory. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
And again, we'll come to empty reasons next week. But in a nutshell, though, if it's optional, you admit it. You don't have to say that you've admitted it. And I know Marika has previously asked, is it allowed to provide an empty reason on a optional section? I think I answered previously, yes. I'm not sure anymore, to be honest.
Right. Yeah.
Because I think there's a should in the requirements at the moment that is saying you should admit. Sorry, I shall admit.
I was looking at just then, and it didn't
Right.
look like it was a shall.
Yeah, but what is it? Is it one of those
It
ambiguous
doesn't have.
statements?
It's an ambiguous statement that doesn't have a should or a shall.
Yeah.
So
Anyway,
it may change.
we're going to have fun next week when we talk about empty reasons. So let me just get through this slide and then we'll do time. Shall conform to PS consumer obligations on the profile referenced in the AUPS bundle. Where an IPS profile is referenced in AUPS bundle, the obligations of the consumer IPS actor shall apply. So it's very similar to previously. It's the AUPS obligations that you need to satisfy, and if we're referencing an IPS profile, then it's the consumer obligation, the IPS obligations that you need to abide by. And finally, it's our general one around implementing the requirements of missing data and suppressed data in the context of the AUPS consumer. And I wonder if I've got my empty sections bit there as well. So yes, given that we've talked about this already, I think we'll include empty sections into this principle as well.
I'm going to give a warning on time, Heath.
I'm done, I think, for now. So, I mean, basically I think my agenda went to plan. Next week, we will cover the rest and hence start getting into the actual must support and obligations, missing data and suppressed data, empty sections, and then declaration of conformance to PS.
I
Any
think we'll also make sure
concluding-
we have a branch with examples from profiles and what we just talked about kind of looks like for people. I think we need to do that for the next session.
So we've got a TDG session next week where we're going to go through composition. And I take your point, Marvin. We have been very theoretical without any examples and things like that. But I think that this is just, we are expecting this, I guess, this group to be familiar, I guess, with at least IPS, and hence not needing to go down that route and to try and just get the theoretical principles in place. We do have the TDG next week, which I believe is going to go through bundle and composition as it currently stands. And what I'm hearing from you, Danielle, is that we will take that one step further and apply some obligations.
Not in the next TDG, but
Yeah,
I
and that's
think.
what I say for the meeting after this
Oh
meeting
yeah,
after.
yeah.
So
For
next week will
for
be without obligations, just must supports. And then the following week we'll probably have something that we can review from an obligation perspective.
Let's stick them both together. We go, here's the walkthrough profiles and what happens when we apply. Because I think we came to basic agreement around those things. It's the wording we need to clarify.
Yep. And again, I'll ask that I'll put it on Zulip, the link to that Confluence page, but really encourage you to review them. Obviously, my PowerPoints are slightly different to the words or the layout in the page, a bit more sentence form. So yeah, wording, format, etc., suggestions, because we are working towards that proposal so that it can be lifted and shifted into the IG. Thank you very much, everyone.